said it started, so we just need to wait. Everyone who's watching this is probably sick of me explaining. I'll explain it to you guys, Matt and John, is that the LinkedIn live backend isn't that great. It's not anywhere near as good as Twitch or something else. You can't plug OBS directly into it, but also you can't really tell it's working until you know it's working, if that makes sense. Like it's sending from StreamYard to LinkedIn, but you can't 100% trust it. But we are live, which is good. So it seems to have worked.
All right.
And we've got some people coming in. Better mute this.
Welcome,
Awesome, guys. Well, it's good to have you in here. For those people who are listening to the podcast, this was going to be a podcast only, but about 45 minutes ago, I just sent you guys an email and said, hey, how about we just do this on video? Repurpose it. So thanks to you guys for coming in. Whereabouts in the world are you both right now?
I'm based in Mexico City right now.
I'm in Minnesota, lovely Minnesota, for the holidays, and then I'm popping down to Mexico to actually visit Matt in January to get out of the cold.
I can't blame you.
Yeah.
We're talking about that. We're talking about that just before. I remember, John, you were saying it's quite cold where you are, and I said I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt at the moment here. It's summer in Australia, and I assume it's basically always summer in Mexico.
Yeah, it's 60s and 70s down there.
It's the first place I've ever lived where you don't have heat or air conditioning because you never need either one of them. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, wow. That's not too bad at all. And we got some people joining in the chat already, which is awesome. So let's just kick off the podcast with an easy thing with either one of you two. Can you give us the quick elevator pitch of your company? And then we got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about today.
I'll give Matt the honor there.
I think we might have lost him.
Frozen Matt.
It looks like it's a little bit frozen. Well, it looks like it's your floor, John.
While Matt is staring at us. Okay. Let me see if I can pull him in here.
While we're waiting for that, just read out some of the people in the chat. We got Todd, Frederick, William. Frederick saying he was in Mexico 3 weeks ago. I'd love to come to Mexico. Here we go. We got Matt back. Double Matt. Hello. Welcome back.
All right, there he is.
Welcome back. So you've been given the task, Matt. Give us a quick elevator pitch rundown of your company before we dive into our topics today.
Yeah, so basically we run two businesses. One is e-commerce focused, China Ecom Boost, and the other one is MAA Talent China. Basically, we help take Western influencers and help them build and establish a fan base in China. We started off working with NBA players and then NBA teams directly. And now we're working with esports teams quite a bit.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I mean, let's kick off the conversation with China. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but anytime someone mentions the word China and technology, you can see the stars in everybody's eyes, the dollar signs. Everyone says, "Wow, I'm expanding into China, as is everyone else, and I'm instantly going to make $1 trillion because so many people live there." But if it was that easy, I would feel like your company wouldn't exist.
Probably.
B, everyone would do it who hasn't. So can you talk to me a little bit about A, why the companies you're working with want to expand into China, and B, some of the issues that they face that you have to help them work through?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. As we kind of watch China mature into a stronger, more stable economy, I think, everybody, it's basically a situation where we have a rising tide lifts all ships in almost all industries, all niches. So there's just a lot of demand that's being unfulfilled. And because you have this kind of captive market, right? The Chinese can't easily leave. They can't just go somewhere else and, I want to go to New York City and buy a bunch of stuff. So you have kind of a market it's very unique in the fact that they're basically, kind of stuck where they are. And so there's a constant kind of, as this kind of market matures and develops, we're just seeing this demand pick up in everything. China's e-commerce economy is gigantic. It's about 1/3 of their total economy. So they've kind of skipped over this, go to the mall on Saturday and spend all day shopping, and just kind of jumped into the ease of e-commerce. And because of the economies of scale that you can achieve in very densely populated urban areas, delivery and all these things just happen so much faster, right? You watch people, they'll order something on the subway on the way to work and it arrives before lunch. They order something in the afternoon and it's arrived before they get home. So again, the total economy, China's total economy is almost eclipsing the US's, which I think is a good thing. There's 5 times as many people there as there are in the US. And if we are to continue this growth that everybody wants to see, it's got to come from some of these other emerging economies. And not to say that China's an emerging economy, but it's not quite mature yet. So there's a lot of room for growth. And what that means is kind of, as these consumption levels continue to drive and increase, you've got, everybody loves to throw around the statistics of the millennials and the Gen Zs in China, but about 400 million Gen Zs and millennials that are in white collar jobs, have been around for a couple of years now and have between $100 and $250 a month of disposable income. So if you multiply that by 400 million, that's a lot of money. And so I think, a part of the challenges are understanding that it's just a totally different culture, and actually it's funny, when I relate this to people, it gets a chuckle, but I think they're very similar to Americans in terms of the way they view themselves and their culture, right? Americans tend to be slightly xenophobic and kind of unaware of the rest of the world and what's happening because their economy is so big and there's so much going on at home. And China is very similar in that way. China, literally in Chinese means the Middle Kingdom. So it's in the past it was thought of as being between heaven and the plebs, the regular people on the rest of the planet. And again, talking about this giant country, giant population, and 5,000 years of continuous human civilization. China's been the largest economy in 18 of the last 20 centuries. So it's not really something that's new. It's actually, this not being the largest economy in the world is something that's kind of new for them. So, but yeah, it's just a totally different way of kind of looking at business, much more relationship driven. And like you said, everybody has these wide eyes when they talk about going into China, and they rush into it without really understanding what the differences are and how to try to make deals and how to make things work, and understand what's driving both sides. We talk about, John and I have spent plenty of time in China, and I think people get thrown off by we call it the yes with a question mark. When when I was in manufacturing for a long time, you'd say, "Oh, can you do this in 30 days?" And they say, "Yes." And people would be like, "Oh," they said, "Yes, great, let's go." But they don't realize that actually means, no, I can't do that. But because of the cultural differences, admitting that you can't do something, is a loss of face for them. So, I think that, that's a lot of what we try to do. And having been involved in business in China since 2004 and kind of being a bridge to China, it's really the only place I've really ever worked. And so I have, that instinctual way of doing business with the Chinese is something that, we help bring to the table and with the companies that we're working with.
I like that. Yes, with a question mark. It's like these cultural differences, and we'll talk about Southeast Asia a bit later. But I remember talking to the APAC sales director or APJ sales director for Corsair when I worked there, and he was talking about various Southeast Asian countries. The intricacies are ridiculous. Where you've got red light, green light for shipping, where the customs, your internal guy at customs will say, green light, go. Like the shipping needs to land today. Otherwise it's going to get seized or it's just going to go missing for no reason whatsoever, and things like that. So it's, all of these cultural differences. So you mentioned influencers as well. So in Australia, our influencers perform extremely well, especially with the American market. I assume it's because maybe they like our accent, they like our type of comedy, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. How do Western influencers fare into the Chinese and wider Eastern market? Do they need to tailor their sort of content, or is it just a process of getting them on GQ and getting them on, Weibo and these kind of platforms and letting them do what they already do?
Well, I think there's definitely a localization process, and actually, that's kind of what we specialize in, is kind of tailoring that around. Again, you have this culture that really is very inward looking, right? And they kind of assume that, their cultural norms are kind of ubiquitous. So they're not really, well versed. And again, like talking about that trap market, you don't meet a ton of Chinese people that have traveled around the world and have been to Europe and Australia and all these other places. So they're kind of not as aware of other cultures as I think a lot of people are. And like you said, the difference between going from, hearing an Australian and a British accent or something like, oh yeah, that's like a slightly different accent or something like that. But in China, you have, a totally different language, totally different culture, and there's a ton of languages there. So a lot of what we're seeing is, actually taking Chinese influencers and having them go out abroad and go to other countries and live stream sales events and things like that. But we are seeing a shift as you see some of these larger e-commerce platforms like Tmall, which is a very high-end version of the Alibaba's Taobao platform, are actually actively courting Western influencers to come to China. And now that there is a little more understanding of Western goods and business and things like that, and the desire has been clearly demonstrated, I think you're going to see more and more of that kind of crossover where you're having foreign influencers go into China and explain why these products are good and what there is that's interesting and different about them. The products that do really well there are ones that are unique to China and can't be, the Chinese aren't manufacturing, if you have some ingredients or something like that, we see a lot of the stuff in skincare, cosmetics, health and beauty, mommy baby stuff is really popular. So yeah, I think that's going to continue to grow and expand.
What's what are some of the main reasons that a Western influencer might want to go over there? Is there the possibility of, let me rephrase the question. So there was a quite often time where there were streaming platforms in China that were paying Western Dota 2 players to stream on them because Dota 2 is quite a popular Western game as it is a popular Eastern game, paying them up to 1.25 million a year, etc. So the players would go there for the immediate payoff of being paid for their content. Is that why some of the Western influencers might want to go into China, or is it the future earnings potential or new audience potential? Is it a mix? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing, there's just a kind of a content war. You've got the two dominant streaming platforms, Huya and Douyu, are both listed on New York Stock Exchange, and they're both backed by Tencent. So there's kind of a dogfight and a scramble.
Isn't everything backed by Tencent?
Both of those.
And then Billy as well.
Really, they're the Google of China.
And Billy just
I
closed
think,
that deal for
the immediate payoff is.
I was going to say, Billy just closed that deal for the League of Legends World Championships. So you got like basically three of them in the mix now.
$100 million plus.
Yeah,
and I think if you look, too at what we were seeing with the NBA before we had the flare up with the Rockets there, Tencent's contract with the NBA was, $750 million a year for streaming the games to China. So there's a huge appetite for that content, and it's really just about positioning yourself for it. I think in the short term, if you can find something like that, streaming, Dota 2 streaming is great. But what we're trying to do is build up and engage that fan base and develop an asset. So you have a following on Weibo, a following on WeChat that is developed. And like I said, because e-commerce is so kind of ubiquitous throughout the country and the demand is just growing, just getting an affiliate link and putting it on your WeChat accounts, it can be really make a ton of money. And that's something we're seeing is the NBA teams kind of are unshackled from NBA China and have the ability to go out and monetize their own presence. All these teams have millions of followers on Weibo, just kind of putting affiliate offers in front of this fire hydrant of traffic. People are going to buy all this stuff anyway. They might as well buy it, from your site with your unique tracking link. And that's kind of, the way e-commerce works in China is this gigantic net of referrals and affiliates and all this kind of thing where everybody's, leveraging the attention that they're able to develop to sell products, and I think that this goes back to, the Chinese kind of have an inherent distrust of government and just like most people do, I guess. So they're not very likely to take same thing goes for big companies, they're not really likely to take what a company says about their own product so well. So having that intermediary that is a trusted person in the middle that can refer you to something is very valuable. And so when we're looking for influencers, we want to make sure that they're not just kind of grabbing every affiliate deal that comes their way to make money, because then you kind of, dilute that trust that you have built up with your audience and that following.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the affiliate thing, because it's not something I've talked about before. That's a major source of income for influencers all over the world. And like you were saying, to explain for those people who don't know, essentially what it is, if you like me, you can click on this affiliate link. Anything you purchase through this store, I get a kickback. Or you can link to direct products and say, hey, here's the keyboard I use that's sponsored for me. If you'd like to purchase it, A, it's trackable. B, I get a kickback. And, I work a lot with tech influencers, especially in the past with my work at Thermaltake and Corsair. And, some of these guys are making up to 40% of their income purely from those Amazon referral links that they're not really pushing at all. They're just in their bio. They're just in the description of the YouTube videos. And obviously, it works well for those tech guys because they're reviewing products, and quite often someone's watching the video of the graphics card review because they're thinking about purchasing, then they'll purchase with that link. But, there's some guys in the US who I know are making up to 300K USD a month just off Amazon referral links. And that's at an average of, it's like 0.9 to 1.6%, depending what the product is. So, you can put the numbers together there and see how much they're actually selling for those brands. So I assume with China, skincare products are not always that cheap. And generally skincare products are so much higher margins than anything you see in the tech space. I had dinner with a guy from the power tools industry last night as well, very successful Aussie entrepreneur, explaining to me as well, not dissimilar margins. It seems like not dissimilar margins in automotive and such as well. A lot of people are working off anywhere between 10 to 30 points. But, when you look at the makeup industry and this kind of stuff, you're seeing much, much higher margins, which allows for that expenditure.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really, really exciting for us in esports in China, is we're starting to see women come into the space as consumers of the content a lot more. And they make up to 70% of their e-commerce purchases, even when they're buying products for males in the market. So kind of seeing them participate more. I was telling John, I was just in Shenzhen in China for 2 months over the summer, and I literally, I'm a tall guy. I'm almost 2 meters tall. And so, walking through the subway system and having people just kind of bump into me because they're just walking and looking at their phone and watching somebody play Dota or something like that. I mean, it was pretty unbelievable, and again, we're fairly newcomers to the esports industry, and kind of seeing how much that, Chinese people love to consume that kind of content. It's really interesting. But yeah, like you're saying, I mean, you're basically putting these affiliate offers in front of this huge fire hydrant of traffic. And because you said, like you said, the margins are so good, and you're able to, the influencers are able to use unique tracking links and feel confident that, hey, if I put this stuff up there and I talk about these products, people are going to go through these links, and I'm going to get my affiliate commissions through that. So that's been something, China, that's been huge for years. I think they estimate the influencer market at about $17 billion last year, just in straight affiliate commissions. And now you see like something like Weibo, which is like a Twitter on steroids, I guess, has very clearly stated, hey, we're really going to focus on content-driven e-commerce now. And I think that, for them, it's a big play, and something like WeChat, that's a more closed, controlled ecosystem. There's a lot more trust there, but I've seen as high as $5 per user to acquire people in that. So it's a much different system. But I think that this kind of influencer directed marketing, is not going anywhere. And people kind of talk about it like it's some new thing, but really it's just like asking a friend, what do you think about this product, or what do you recommend, or something like that. Like that's nothing new. It's just, I think, in the States especially, it gets a bad name because every fitness person is like, drink this tea and you'll lose weight, and buy this crap. And if you like me, do this. And in China, it's a little bit different, and again, like we talked about, it's more of an ongoing discussion. Chinese people are very like to ask a lot of questions. They say, in the West, you need about 6 touch points before they trust a brand. In China, it's closer to 9 to 10. And we see this often, of having phone numbers available so they can call. And even though the answers are on the FAQ page, they just, they want to know, hey, is this real? Is this legit? Is somebody there? Is somebody going to answer this question? So I think, there is more of this kind of discussion that goes on for products in China, but the demand is just through the roof.
It's really interesting you mentioned the female aspect of people coming in. And for better or for worse, I remember talking to a supplier in the apparel industry about this. And and saying that if you want to make a lot of apparel sales, you need two things. You need A, a female audience. You need B, Afterpay. And that's the way where everything comes through. And I don't know another brand personally, for example, that sells sunglasses, and something like 70% of their audience is female, and 75% of their purchases are through Afterpay and things like that too. So are there other services like that in China? Obviously, there's a lot of ways in China you can pay through things like WeChat and different ways. But do they have that, buy now, pay later kind of services as well that are picking up?
I think that, credit is kind of becoming a little bit more prevalent, but it's been something, for a lot of what's really attractive for a lot of the brands that we're working with on the e-commerce side is that, everybody's WeChat Pay and Alipay, is tied to their bank account. So it's a direct debit. There's no chargebacks. There's no failure to pays, things like that. China is just cash flush right now. So credit is not something that's been, kind of easily available for a long time, but I think it will become more and more available. And then you're really going to see another gigantic spike as people start becoming less conscious consumers and saying like, oh, well, I only have XYZ amount of money in my bank account. They can be a little more like Americans and say, hey, who cares? I'll pay for it later. I don't even think about it.
So what's the risk? Why isn't everybody jumping into China? Like you talked about some cultural barriers. You've talked about, some issues of localization and that kind of stuff. But are there risks? Like, I want to use another example from a dinner I had last night where, people just creating too many products for the market. Are people thinking they're going to come into China? They're pre-purchasing 400,000 units of stock and then realize that it's not a cultural fit, it's not a market fit, or are they selling 10,000 in the first month, they're making 15,000 for the next, and they hit a wall and they don't sell anymore? Like what are some of the risks for people expanding?
Yeah, I definitely think that you can definitely fall flat on your face if you don't understand the culture. And we see this every year while we watch the brands try to make their Chinese New Year themed products and it's really funny sometimes, but sometimes you'd say like, oh, it's really hard to see what would get traction and what wouldn't. I was one jewelry company last year that tried to make this jewel for the year of the monkey and ended up looking like some crazy skull and things. And when the Chinese internet piles on, man, they really pile on. We see it every year with kind of Dolce & Gabbana. Those guys can't keep their foots out of their mouth when it comes to China. They end up having a bunch, they did this campaign where they had this famous Chinese actress like eating a piece of pizza with chopsticks, and people just piled on it. And, the Dolce & Gabbana got defensive about it. Next thing you know, people are burning stuff in the streets and their stock is dipping. And so I think, people really feel like they don't have an understanding of the Chinese culture, and they just don't understand where to start. And they think it's one of those things like you're saying, oh, I got to get 10,000 units. I got to ship them all over there. I got to import them into China and then try to sell them. But actually, even with this trade war and everything that's going on with the States, China just makes it easier and easier and easier to sell into China. You can use the cross-border commerce system, which basically allows you to drop ship into China with no Chinese bank account, no Chinese company. So there's really little risk if you understand what the pathways are. But the other thing is, because it is a $1.9 trillion e-commerce market, like there's a lot of noise out there. It's hard to stand out, and you can't just show up and be like, hey, I got this red watch, buy it. Like, well, why? And so I think because that market, it is in some senses, like I mentioned before, it's immature in some senses in terms of the way they consume, but everybody's there. There's just a ton of advertising constantly. There's a big difference when you walk around in China. There's advertisements in the elevators, there's advertisements on the subway, and it's much more advanced of a marketing system than a lot of people would think. So yeah, I mean, for us, the easiest sales are when a company has somebody on their staff that has been to China recently, and they can see everything. One, they can see how much demand there actually is, but also, hey, we have no idea where to start. We have no idea where to go, no idea what to do. So it's not as, all the platforms are different. The language is a big difference, and it's not something you can just throw into Google Translate and throw it up there and think that it's going to sound, local. And so I think that there are a lot of challenges, and it's definitely not easy, but the sheer size of that market and the growth, I think, is what's really attractive to people.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying sounds exactly like when big corporate brand number 1, 2, 3 tries to get into gaming and esports and
Right.
say, what's up, fellow children?
Right.
We're loving the memes. We're all about the gamers. You guys like Doritos, don't you? Like,
Yeah. Buy some more.
Yeah, exactly. Buy this V8 truck that Gen Zs hate because it's killing the environment. Things like that. Like,
Right.
They don't. You need to.
It's a cultural fluency.
Yeah, that's something
Yeah,
I'm trying to
exactly.
think about.
Like I got invited to a boardroom lunch with some very influential people, with the member of parliament, the managing director of car sales, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, head of marketing at one of the big four banks, a bunch of heads of university, the Australian Computer Society, et cetera, et cetera. And I was glad I got the invite there because I could provide a lens from Gen Z, millennials, influencers, et cetera. I posted a little bit about it on LinkedIn, but I haven't talked about it really yet. And part of what I said to them and what I say to everyone is I think every board in these big companies needs a young person filter. They need a hired young person. They'll literally grab a 14-year-old off the street and say, hey, if we did this, what do you think? And they're going to be pretty honest. They're usually going to say that's shit or that's good. And sure, they don't have a degree, but they can still tell you from the lens of a 14-year-old that's shit or that's good. So at least you can get somewhere to start, and maybe you could use that to start your thinking and go from there. And I went through the same thing with them as I think I went through with my LinkedIn live stream and podcast with PPD, the pro Dota player. And often I feel like it's us versus them. Often I feel like me in the business side of esports, we're making decisions for the players without talking to them, without asking them. And I think that a lot of the time these big companies are doing the same, or if they're coming into gaming, or if you're going into China. Like if you asked someone who lives in China, like, hey, what do you think of this product? What do your friends think of this product? And I'm going through the same thing right now. I've got an opportunity to do some interesting work in the power tool industry, which is different, but has a lot of ties back to the content and influencer and stuff that we've been doing. And I'm just going to go ask a couple of tradies, hey, where do you buy your tools? Why? What makes you want to buy a brand or go through a certain retail or a B2B aspect? Just go and talk to some people. And it sounds obvious and everyone says, yeah, I do that. But do you really? Like, when I was running CSGO tournaments, like I made sure I took the time all the time to say, hey, what do you think of that tournament? What could be done better? Because I think people like to say they do, and people like to send out surveys, and I think it makes them feel good, but it doesn't actually make the people who are participating get the chance to actually say anything. So, I mean, that being said, do you have any focus groups in China? Like, how are you garnering that customer feedback?
Yeah, I mean, we do that. I mean, for our e-commerce stuff, we do a market entry study where we'll go out to a mall and ask a bunch of people stuff. But what we found is the most effective is to go directly to influencers in those industries, right? So if you've got a product for a mommy baby group, instead of talking to 200 people, you go find an influencer and say, hey, what do you think about this product? Would you like to put this to your people? Because then you're going to get, I mean, they're really that kind of, condensed opinion of thousands and thousands of people, and especially in China, where the numbers skew everything. Being able to get somebody who is going to be, inundated with opinions, 100,000 people's opinions every day, every week, they're really going to understand and be in touch with that group and really what they're looking at. So instead of, and again, like we talked about, when there's a big difference. Like, if you walk up to somebody and in China and you're like, are you confident in your purchasing ability? Of course they're going to say yes, right? Because to say no, would be a loss of face. It'd be embarrassing to say, oh, geez.
Yeah.
And where or some people just don't care and just like, yeah, sure, whatever. No, I'm not happy with it or whatever, which is why you have these weird things in the States like consumer confidence index. And in China, that would be 1,000% every time. If you're asking people one-on-one. So I think, that's another thing too, where you're going to have an influencer who makes their income, their livelihood off of managing this group of people. They're going to be more in touch with that group of people than even those people are, right? Because those people, that's just a part of their life, whatever. But someone who runs a mommy baby group of 50,000 people in China is going to know that group inside and out, exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they want, and exactly how to present and ask for feedback on something to get a real answer. So I think this kind of goes, a lot with what we're doing. Whereas with the NBA, you can just put a product in front of that and on their Weibo and try to get some affiliate money because they're just there for the basketball content and whatever. But with esports, something we've had to learn very quickly and actually working hand in hand with a bunch of our customers is that this interruption marketing and being like, hey, games, and like, check out this beer. It's like, that's not going to work. Like, it can't be this kind of, rah, rah, rah. It has to be woven into the content in a smarter way, or kind of seen as a long-term partnership where you're discussing these things. And when before you're involved in this stuff, you don't really see it as much. But now I kind of see it everywhere where it's like, oh, the Dodge Ram shot chart for the basketball game or whatever like that, where you're seeing these kind of just reminders and reinforcements of kind of what's going on. And I think that, that in China still has a long way to go and develop. But it will continue to do that, as this kind of content consumption shifts away, especially in the West where, people don't really watch TV or anything like that anymore. I think that's going to continue to kind of go that way, but the brands do need to get smarter about how they're presenting their products. Like you said, the newest gas guzzling SUV to millennials, that's a tough sell, especially, with kind of all these issues that we're having now. And I think that people want to feel like these brands are actually being supported, and that the things that they love, this esports content and things like that, is supporting, something that they want to support. And a lot of these teams are sponsored by fast foods and things like that are not necessarily energy drinks and all this stuff. But, we're also seeing some of the smaller teams kind of pivot and say, especially in Asia, where you have, in China, there's a big concern about, are these gaming good for the youth? And in China, they're very protective. It's not some wide open market where it's like, hey, in the States, like, go nuts, sell them whatever you want. You want to do, vape juice or whatever like that, go nuts. But I think in China, in 2008 or 2018, basically the whole gaming industry was on hold there as the Chinese government kind of deliberated and said, is this good? Is this bad? So a lot of the things that we try to do is tie it back to education or community and things like that, and kind of showing, hey, these things don't have to be just a drain on the system or a drain on people's socialization skills. We can kind of weave other things into it and make this something that can be a benefit.
Yeah, content-driven marketing, right? It's something like you're talking about, and had a lot of conversations with people about coming on to the things that I post to influence the B2B side of things, and advertising with me on content marketing. I remember listening to a podcast. I think it was a startup podcast by Gimlet Media, talking about I can't remember what news organization it was in America, but one of the major ones, and they have a whole most of their revenue is now driven through advertorials, and they have a whole floor of people who are driving that. It was a lady who founded it. It's named after her. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's going to kill me if I don't remember that. But anyway, so it's it's such a popular thing. So attention economy, there's advertising flying around everywhere. So to me, that says if you want to advertise to someone, do it through a vehicle they enjoy. Perfect segue into esports.
Right.
So tell me, how's esports coming to your business? How's it expanding your possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like we said, it's a long winding road to how we got here, but 3.5, 4 years ago, when we started doing a lot of the e-commerce development into China, we were kind of looking at the P&L and saying, geez, we're spending 65-70% of our clients' budget on influencer marketing, and it's working, but it would be a lot easier if there was more natural pull and stuff like that. There's only so much content you can create about funny socks and new bras and things like that. That's how it led us to the NBA, is realizing, hey, there's so much attention in China, and there's most of the NBA players are just like, I played 13 minutes last night and had 12 points, and they can people can find that stuff anywhere. So I think what's really interesting for us is kind of watching the way that Chinese kind of interact with social media and how they consume content. And one thing I really try to describe to our clients is, look, it's not just about the content of the games and blah, blah, blah. Like, people want to know, what'd you have for breakfast? What do you guys talk about before the match? What happens afterwards? What does your backyard look like? The team has a team house. What does the team house look like? And I think that's a little bit of trying to understand that market. You have this captive market where Chinese people aren't, going to Thailand for, I guess they are, but they're not going to Thailand for like a weekend vacation for the most part. People in China live in, a concrete box in the sky, and they share it with a couple of people, and they take crowded elevators to a crowded subway to a crowded office, and then they have a quick lunch break where they eat as quick as they can. So for them, social media is an escape from that day-to-day grind. And if you look at the consumption of when the Chinese tend to consume content, it's in the mornings when they're on the way to work. It's a huge spike in the afternoon when they're taking their breaks, and a huge spike in the evenings, especially with gaming. Gaming stuff is very late in the evening. So kind of trying to understand the way the Chinese want to consume and why they're consuming that content, right? It's about, I've heard people describe it even with esports and luxury and whatever is, you're selling a fantasy world. You're selling this fantasy escape. And I think that that's really an interesting way to put it is people, the day-to-day grind is difficult, and it can really chew you up. And in China, it's fast and it's crowded and it's noisy. So when people want to dive into, another world, esports gives them that, and it's exciting and entertaining. And it's just like anything too, where it's like, I grew up playing ice hockey, and ice hockey isn't super popular in the States because most people don't understand how amazing the things are that people are doing. So that's another reason I think gaming really transcends, as we talked about before, of like why it's so popular is because anybody can play these games, and they play them like, holy crap, that's really hard. Like playing Rocket League is really difficult. That's even just, being basically okay at it is very difficult. So seeing people who are really amazing at it, if you've played that game, it can be mind blowing for people, and they really love to consume this content. It was, a little bit surprising to me too at first, but it's starting to make more and more sense. And like I said, anybody with a $300 or $400 computer and internet connection can participate. And I think that's why it's spread so globally and so fast.
Well, it's how we ended up in esports. Going back to Chris's question here, was we were working with the NBA teams, and we started talking to them about their NBA 2K properties. And we, it's very interesting. The Chinese are, they love their basketball. They love the NBA, but the NBA 2K is, it's quite restrictive in terms of what you're able to do, and also, not too many people like that game actually. So looking at the NBA 2K, we just kind of naturally, I guess, advanced onto esports, and just realized like how large the opportunity was, and how massively popular it is in China.
Right. I mean, the first kind of eye-opening thing for me, was, we talked about was reaching out to teams about the international that was going to be in China, that was in Shanghai this last summer, and kind of, for us, when we're working with these direct-to-consumer electronic or product brands, the reason that we can get them to China is, one, we only have to explain China. We don't have to explain digital marketing. And the difficult thing with the NBA teams is, you might seem like they're super advanced and their technological understanding, but explaining, retargeting and, unique tracking links and stuff like that, these guys, their eyes just glaze over, and you just realize, man, it's just been a fire hydrant of money for the NBA for so long that they don't really have to really be super sharp and really understanding all this stuff. It's been it's still kind of a cowboyish business where everybody, Ford shows up and is like, here's another $10 million for, this ad placement we're going to do here. But in esports, it does have a bit of a similar feeling to it because it has grown so fast. But, the fact that there are all these tournaments all across the world, and a lot of them are in Asia, lends itself to the teams having kind of understanding that there is a huge untapped market there in China. And so for us, be able to say, hey, we can help you get in China, and here's how we do it, and here's how we can kind of help you engage with the fan base. I mean, again, at the end of the day, esports is driven by influencer marketing, right? I mean, that at the core, that's what's really driving all that revenue, right? Is sponsors aren't giving a bunch of money because they're friendly or they really like the game. They're giving that money because it's driving a return for them eventually. And I think that that's really something that's important to understand is the more that you can do that and kind of show that these brands do have a way to engage with a fan base through esports in a smart way that can be measured. I think that that's really going to be where this kind of grows by leaps and bounds.
So what resonates well with the Chinese audience? We talked about marketing, retargeting, pushing ads, content driven marketing, influencers, etc. What about performance? Is that something that's high on their radar? So there's been some questions that have come through in the chat, for example, from Pierre. And we've talked a bit about Dota 2. China's had some great performance in the past, especially and present with Dota 2 with teams like PSG, LGD and IG. IG winning TI in the past, PSG, LGD placing very highly a few times, and also the Chinese coming and absolutely dominating League of Legends for a while as well, and the massive growth of League of Legends in China. So, if you think about the Australian market, a lot of people here like swimming just because we're really good at it. A lot of people like cricket because we're very good at it. Mm-hmm. Is it similar in China? Are they attracted as much to the performance as they are the marketing, or one more so than the other?
Yeah, I mean, League of Legends isn't really a driver for us for the most part because the foreign teams aren't that good at it, and they kind of come into the market and it's something that doesn't get as much resonation. So I think Dota has been a big driver for us, some of these new titles as well, because the foreign teams are more competitive. But as we see the market kind of grow overall, I think you're going to see a bit of a shift. China loves a winner, sure, but they love the competition too. Watching someone like Team OG in the international in Shanghai and kind of seeing, the nationalism of China kind of flare up and watching them battle, as we see other teams kind of come in and compete with them as well. I think it is interesting to kind of see, the expansion of the Chinese attention towards these games and these teams, where they just respect they understand how difficult it is to play these games, and that really kind of drives the popularity of them. For whatever reason, Dota and League of Legends, those games are kind of similar, but Dota has been a huge driver, and it's hugely popular all across Asia, including Southeast Asia. So yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the NBA teams that are most popular in China, it was the Warriors, and before that it was the Lakers and stuff like that. They love winners. They love the royalty, NBA royalty. The Bulls are still popular because they're still riding Jordan. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the surface level, but you can find an audience for just about anything. We're kind of seeing the growth of Counter-Strike still popular there. Rainbow Six is up and coming.
Okay.
Rocket League, I think it's just a huge market, and there's going to be little pools and pockets of everything. But the big boys, definitely League of Legends is huge. And so for us, we're even looking at working with some companies to say, okay, let's reach out to these Chinese teams and do some sponsorship deals with, some of these League of Legends teams because of the amount of eyeballs that they generate. It's just absolutely insane. And watching that kind of, again, attention is currency these days, and being able to get somebody to focus on something is pretty difficult. And yeah, I mean, even for me, I think you start talking to some of these kids that are growing up now, and like you mentioned before, like finding a 14-year-old to kind of tell you what's going on. I mean, these kids, they don't know what a remote control is, or like, oh, I got to be home at 3:30 to watch my program. Like, what? Wow, just watch it whenever you want on your iPad. And I mean, that was a big revelation for us. When we first started trying to staff up and scale, we're like, oh, we got to find people who are social media coordinators and blah, blah, blah. And like, when you look for that on someone's resume, you end up hiring somebody who's my age, in the mid 30s to do something like that. And it was just falling flat. And then so we started like, all right, we're just going to go into these fan groups of these games and hire kids out of college. And, it's weird for me. I show up in the office in China and nobody's there at noon, 12:30, or like, man, what's going on? But then they show up at 1 p.m. and they stay in the office till 3 a.m. And they're super engaged with it. They love kind of creating the content. They love kind of having their fingers on the pulse of what's going on and being involved with these foreign teams. It's really exciting for them. So I think, again, trying to make sure that you're finding something that resonates with your audience, with whoever, is really important.
So we talked before recording about the industry growth of esports and being likened to things like MMA and X Games, etc. Obviously, Anything about MMA in particular, it's starting to really come into China. You know, the UFC now has a Chinese female champion for the first time, and they've seen a massive boost because of that. You know, and the X Games has kind of come and gone. But I think, you know, the topic that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about was the limitations of other industry growths versus esports. And, you know, some of the things that I likened is that these other sports are often barred by policy and also barred by the physicality, not just the equipment, but needing the stadiums. So an example is, you know, Letway, which is like Muay Thai, but you can headbutt and there's no gloves. You know, they're about to have their first ever showing, I think, in America. The sport's over 2,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's like a French-Canadian champion of the world, guy called David Ledoux. And, you know, they're saying that I think it's Wyoming is the place that they have to go to because it's the only one that can approve it. Similar with the MMA. You know, there's certain states that don't allow UFC still, a thing that can sell out Madison Square Garden, you know, and has millions of dollars worth of pay-per-view sales. Bare knuckle boxing, same thing. It's only able in a couple of states. And, you know, X Games is sometimes prohibitive as well because you need a massive slope with snow on it. To do half of their sports, whereas esports is global. You know, it circumvents a lot of those issues. And you know, like you're saying, a couple $100 PC or even just a mobile phone with the free 3G internet connection that you can garner through a lot of plans in Asia these days can have you online and gaming straight away. So, do you see the growth of esports in China or globally stalling, like we've seen with MMA and some of these other extreme sports, or do you see it just continuing to grow?
I mean, I think if you look at what's going to drive all that stuff, you know, like you talked about, I think mobile gaming is one of those things that we're super high on for the next year because of that penetration in the market. You know, everybody who games on PC probably games mobile, but not necessarily the other way around. So I think, you know, again, when we're talking about people trying to maximize their downtime, maximize their escape, whatever, it's much easier for them to jump on their phone and play something, especially now, you know, talking about like 5G really launching in Asia here next year and kind of being all over the place. It's really going to solve a lot of those issues that we're talking about, you know, with the slower participation and whatever. And as these phones, you know, continue to have, you know, basically it's a computer in your pocket and having these stronger processors. You know, I still remember the 8-bit Nintendos and even before that, the Ataris. And now, you know, you can play Grand Theft Auto on your phone, and it just seems, you know, like we're in this whole other world. But I think that, you know, one of those things too is like if you look at that equipment that you need, right? The cell phone companies and then the 5G internet providers, they have a vested interest in pushing that and continue to have that grow, right? It's like if you're talking about X Games, like you mentioned, like snowmobile companies only have so much revenue to invest in it, but when you're talking about technology and hardware and things like that, these are massive global companies that have a vested interest in seeing this succeed. But also, like you said, you know, like even if you're in India and you want to participate in the BMX thing, how are you going to do that? It's not possible, right? I mean, so I think, you know, being able to do all this stuff and live in a virtual world has really connected these communities, you know, and we're seeing this kind of massive growth everywhere. I just don't see it slowing down. If you look at the trajectory, you know, and I hear that from people that are kind of casual, like, oh yeah, esports, it's going to come and go. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, even talking to some of our clients that were talking about this kind of cycle of being like, oh, it's probably going to last a couple of years, blah, blah, blah. I just don't see that. You know, I don't see one, if you look at gaming as an overall industry over the last 15 years, I mean, it's just a skyrocket straight up. It's not going anywhere. People love games. They love all of this stuff. And, you know, as we see kind of more and more of this kind of crossover between celebrities and sports people and gamers, like, I mean, you can't, you know, love them or hate them, you can't deny the popularity of FaZe Clan. I mean, these guys just, they sell merch, they drive everything. You know, you got 16, 17-year-old men, boys screaming like they saw Britney Spears or something at these guys that, you know, trick shot artists. I mean, it's mind blowing. But I just don't, I mean, maybe it's me because I'm involved in it now, but I've never seen anything like this. I think that, you know, it's, as you talked about, the reason that these games are popular is because people know how difficult it is and they can participate, right? Everybody, these kids in rural China or rural India or something like that, they know they're never going to be LeBron James, but they could be, you know, some of these esports stars. Maybe there's a hope for it, right? If they work hard enough and train and stuff like that. You know, I think had China slapped the disapproval on it, I think we would be looking at a very different marketplace right now. But China saying, hey, we recognize this stuff as valuable. Kids are working hard and becoming part of the community and striving to achieve something. I think that's really been a green light for a lot of this investment that's happened. And you see it in the US too, where it's like kids in high school are participating in these leagues. And, for me, seeing what happened at the International with some of our clients, I'm like, oh yeah, great. We'll talk, meet the day before, get some time. We can take them, do some autograph sessions. Like, oh, no. Like, these guys are going to play these competitions and start going and preparing for the next match all day long. There's zero downtime. So yeah, I think that for me, I just don't see any slowdown. And again, talking about the drivers of this, the companies that have vested interest in it, as well as this influencer marketing, being able to peddle that influence around. I just don't see any slowdown.
Right, and this is all like pre-5G coming out. I don't know the exact timeline. Southeast Asia next year, though. The mobile gaming market, we're gonna see massive growth.
And then that gaming market in general in China, that's a big focus for us as well. We're starting to get involved in some game development and working with some companies that want to sell into that market. China is the largest market, and the regulatory issues are no joke. But the pot of gold at the end of that rainbow is very large. And I think if you look at the ability to sell things digitally, you make that Grand Theft Auto 5, it's still making tens of millions of dollars every month, and that game came out 5 years ago. Like,
yeah,
it's just, and I think that's another thing that really sets esports apart, right? If you look at what happened with Overwatch, or I think it was Overwatch, where they're like, oh well, if you just do whatever this arrangement of players, then you have this competitive advantage. It's very difficult to beat, and they're like, okay, well, you can't do that anymore. Okay, boom, problem solved, right? It's not like doping or something like that, where people are like, changing something. It's just very easy for them to analyze what's going on and make sure that it stays competitive. And I think because of that reason, the foundation of esports, it's just very different from anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, look, will esports rescind or die? It seems almost like a dumb question to me because, like you were saying, the games market is bigger than the movie and music markets combined globally already. Esports is 1%, if that, of that market, currently valued at somewhere around $1 billion, said to be maybe 1.2 by the end of the year. And people who participate in something they enjoy like to watch people who are better than them participating in something that they enjoy. So to me, that just seems obvious. And, when people say, oh, how could you watch a guy play video games because they're better than you? Well, why do you watch someone play AFL, like Australian Football League, because they're better than you? Or why do pool people like to watch better pool players, or bowling people? Why do mathematicians like to watch YouTube on certain maths problems that they can't solve? Like, people like to watch others that are more skilled than them so they can learn because they find it exciting, because it's interesting to them. So it seems pretty obvious to me, but for some other people, maybe not so much. But glad we're on the same page.
I think that people, again, try to excuse it away, and they're like, "Well, I don't really get it. It's just another fad." Blah 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 blah. It's like, well, I don't know. I think you're kind of missing the point here. As this kind of sweeps the globe. Have you ever, I think extremes. What do we call that? Extremes. Yeah. It took them forever. It took them a decade to expand into Asia, and then it kind of came up and kind of flopped because it's so much equipment, so much, you're not taking snowmobiling to Asia. That's just not going to happen. So I think the ability for someone to create one title and sell that to the world, it's just so intriguing. If you've ever been involved in software sales and stuff like that, there's a reason that people make so much money in that, because you make one product and sell it 1 billion times. It doesn't cost you much more to deliver it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're 100% right. So what's coming up next for you guys? We talked a little bit about Southeast Asia before the call.
Yeah, that's something that we're really kind of excited about. We're working with a couple of teams to kind of get some beachheads set up for them in Southeast Asia, but that market is growing like China was 10 years ago. We just have these amazing numbers, double-digit year-on-year growth every year in e-commerce, and they're really kind of plugged into hip hop and life and streetwear and lifestyle and all these kinds of things that, when you're starting from from not having much, and the whole country is kind of growing up, and we see the average income rising around the country and disposable income rising. This is where people are investing their money, right? And yeah, the NBA is popular in some areas, but the passion of the fans that you see down there in the Philippines and Malaysia and stuff like that, I think it's that chain of groups. You talk about Southeast Asia, it's that block is the 7th largest economy in the world. So I think it's tough to group them all together because it is really 6 different languages and things like that. But as we see e-commerce kind of scale up there, I think for us being able to focus on China and Southeast Asia, it's really exciting for us. But yeah, I think next year, bigger focus on working with gaming companies to get into China and develop a presence there for themselves, and looking towards Southeast Asia for expansion as well.
Now, back to our previous topic, a good point here from Chris Reed, who's someone, for anyone who's listening to the podcast or watching on LinkedIn Live right now, check him out on LinkedIn. It's Chris CRIS Reed REED. He does a lot of live streams, does his own content and stuff, which is very good. And he was saying something that I agree with, which is gaming is going to be more a way of life as time goes on. And he thinks that people don't understand the power of that. And adding to that, most of my conversation and what seemed to resonate well with the corporates and executives and MPs that I talked to was saying that most brands come to me, they want esports. Under that, really what they want is gaming.
Right.
And under that, what they want is millennials and Gen Z, and gaming is the interface to talk to them. It's the way that you discuss with them. It's the fact that, yeah, exactly. It's the fact that my friends and I, even the ones I live in the same state as, we don't really catch up in person very often at all, unless it's for a music festival or for a special occasion house party like Australia Day or something like that. Besides, we hang out in Discord and we play Dota together. And it's nowhere near as much about the Dota as it is as hanging out. The same way that kids these days don't go and hang out at the local service station, at the skate park, at the shopping centre like they used to, affectionately called mall rats in Australia. That's a colloquialism for you. They hang out in Fortnite. Right. And sometimes they don't even play a game. They just talk to each other in Fortnite. The same way that for many years I've been hanging out in Ventrilo or TeamSpeak or now Discord, whatever the flavor of the month is, or Mumble it was for a while, with my friends. We'll hang out there, we'll watch YouTube videos, we'll be half talking to each other all the time. Same way that when I was younger, had my first girlfriend, would be on the phone for like 5 hours, but doing our own thing often, a lot of the time, not even talking to each other. And, it's gaming is now the interface. It's where people hang out. And that's not to the fact that people don't want to leave their bedrooms, but it's the fact that you need a proper reason for them to do that. They don't just want to go to the shops because they go to the shops. Like you said, in China, they can order something on the train on the way home and it can be there, that night. They can order Uber Eats or something like that, equivalent to their house. Or in Australia, we've got Easy, which a lot of the Chinese people use. And, so that's saying that you're looking at these tournaments, there's thousands of people going to them, tens of thousands of people. Why? It's because it's a money can buy experience. There's Dota 2 player signings. They can see the pros in person.
It was really astounding to me that there's no major Dota tournaments in China in 2020. I was really astounded by that. We have one of the services we're looking at is helping Chinese travel abroad to go watch some of these tournaments, which to me is mind blowing. But they are such passionate fans, and then seeing that at TI, the Dota fan base is a bit older and a bit wealthier, so there's a lot of revenue behind that, and people love this stuff. It's you want to people, why would you watch somebody play video games? Why would you watch anybody do anything? Like, it doesn't really matter, and I get into this discussion too, where it's like, well, who cares why they do it? It's a fact that there's millions of people doing it. So you either sit there and try to contemplate why this is happening, or you build a business around it, like we did. And I think, for us to try to understand, like John mentioned, having this cultural fluency with China and kind of being involved with it for 15 years, right? I live in Mexico now. I'm having a really tough time learning Spanish, even though it's so close to English, because I spent 13 years hearing Chinese every day and speaking it for so long that it's kind of changed my brain. So again, I think it's really about, like you mentioned, it's about understanding that, hey, this is where people are now, and they're, if you want to get in front of those audiences, it's not about, a 15-second ad at the Super Bowl anymore. It's about, and that's not really engagement anyway. Like that's still the old Mad Men billboard philosophy of like, well, there's a million people a million eyeballs are going to see that. Okay, well, how many leads does that generate? How many conversions does that generate? And trying to get people to understand that all this stuff is more trackable. And the reason that there's a benefit to doing this digital marketing is you can see what's working and you can pivot from that. So a lot of what we do and kind of try to help people understand is that, there's a lot more ability to do that in Asia and China, where you can track these things and try to, this isn't a blindly feeling around in this market, that we're actually coming up with a strategy, setting that strategy, executing on that, and then pivoting based on data points. And that's really the future, for whatever you're talking about here, whatever kind of marketing. Everybody's always going to want to sell products, and the influence is there with the esports groups, and I just don't see that going away.
Awesome. So we talked about a lot today. If someone wants to connect with you, follow you online, or use your services, where can they find you?
You can check us out at maatalentchina.com. And then my LinkedIn profile, I think, is just, Matthew Kowalak, Kowalak.
Fantastic. And you, John?
Likewise, it's John Pelcak, Pelcak at LinkedIn. We'll be happy to connect with anyone.
Yeah, I love geeking out about this stuff. So anybody has any questions about China, more than happy.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think we're going to have to continue our conversation, especially on the influencer route, working with a lot of influencers at the moment, myself being hyper-focused on helping to set them up for the future, whether that's gaining equity in companies, whether that's creating their own companies, products, and, diversifying their income streams. Mm-hmm. Because right now there's a massive disparity. We talked about this a bit in my last LinkedIn Live with Kieran John, and I got taken to the cleaners a little bit by comments of people who honestly I think didn't watch the whole video, watched the clip, and then decided to summarize my opinion and my thoughts. And to clarify on that, I talked about what's the earning potential of people at certain subscriber levels, and obviously for me anyway, that 500,000 subscribers does not equal the same amount of views or the same amount of dollars. But we were just talking about a benchmark. If you have that many subscribers, what can you expect to make, considering, everything's going normal? The same way you could say, if I have 30 employees, how much money should I expect to make? Well, of course, it changes per industry. Right. But what I'm seeing is that, I've got some friends who are influencers, or even business associates who are influencers, who are of comparable size. One, let me give you a direct case study. 2 people on 2 different platforms. Mm-hmm. One gets 68 million views on their platform. One gets 53 million views on the other platform. One person's making $4,000 a month. The other person's making $5 to $10 million a year. Mm-hmm. So the disparity is incredible. So I'm trying to help these lower earning people understand their potentials and how to get to the higher, because sometimes it's, I don't know if it's like a secret, it's like some tap that you just can't find that's under your house. But when you turn it on, like you're saying, it can be like a fire hydrant. But sometimes you just need to find those ways to turn it on, and different platforms monetize in different ways. Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, they don't pay you for posting content. You need to make your own dollars, whereas YouTube does. So, and Twitch does. So it's just about finding the right ways for you on your platform to monetize. And I think myself and many other people, we're still just figuring that out.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's something we've had to learn in China, where it's like the Chinese version of YouTube. They're like, you can kind of tip people in local credits or whatever, but there is no AdSense to monetize it. Everything needs to be monetized through affiliates, and there's a ton of money in there, but you have to know how to get it, right? So it's not about just showing up and being like, well, I got all these followers, so give me money. It's like, well, okay, great. So I think, really that's really the understanding too. And again, having a strong Chinese economy should be great for everybody. I know it's benefited Australia hugely. And so kind of understanding that there's demand for everything, right? And especially products that are unique ingredients, and really it's just about, understanding the basics and getting that stuff, getting influencers to help you kind of push that stuff. And they're not doing it for free. They're doing it because they want a profit share. But, because of the way that everything's interlinked in China, it's not very difficult to set up these relationships and get that trust, because they know that all the traffic that they're going to send your way is going to be followed, measured, and that they're going to get, their just desserts at the end of the day. And so I think that's what's really interesting and exciting about the Chinese e-commerce economy. And again, when a lot of people in the West are getting more and more restrictive about who we let in and what we do, China's going the other way and making it easier and easier to be involved. And I mean, that's really the future, and that's, what made America great in the first place was bringing in a bunch of people and saying, okay, we're all pushing each other to do better, as opposed to being like, let's, shut things off and, I just want to protect what I got. That leads to stagnation. I think bringing in people and pushing each other is what leads to kind of creating something greater. So I'm very bullish on the Chinese economy and bullish on Asia in general as being a big driver for the next 10, 20, 30 years, the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's like open source, right? It's worked well for Tesla. It's worked very well for Microsoft in the past. And, you can see the difference between Microsoft and Apple. Apple keeping everything close to their chest and saying, trust me. And Microsoft saying, hey, look, everything here is open. Right. Have a crack, and same with Tesla. They're kind of the first in their market to do EVs, but everything's public. SpaceX, things are public after a certain period of time. Check it out, follow along, develop. All right, awesome, guys. Well, great to chat. Thanks for coming, and thanks for everyone for tuning into the podcast and to LinkedIn live stream. Awesome to see, Frederick have a lot of discussion here. Pierre, Chris got a great weigh in from Brian, Abney, Kieran, John jumping in for a period of time, Sean Gabriel from Playside as well. So fantastic. Thanks for coming. We've got plenty more of these to come. Thanks, guys. Chat soon.
Rock and roll. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.